All right, we're very excited to have military historian, U.S. Army veteran, and award-winning author Mike Guardia back on Big Blend Radio today. We're calling him Military Mike.
I like it.
It's the M&Ms.
Well, okay.
Hey, we learned that M&Ms come from military, that they have their shells. They don't melt because they were used in the military. We did learn that the other day.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. But anyway, Mike is back on Big Blend Radio to talk about his latest book. It's the biography, Crusader, General Donn Starry and the Army of His Times. I've been reading this. What an incredible man. Apparently he missed combat in World War II in Korea, but also became one of the most influential commanders of the Vietnam War. And after Vietnam was one of the intellectual giants who reshaped the U.S. Army and its doctrines. And throughout his career, he worked to improve training, leadership, and conditions for the men who served under him. Of course, the books are all available on Amazon. Mike's written a number of books, and he's been on our show. I think this is his fourth time. And the best thing to do, I always say, is to go to the author's website, MikeGuardia.com. You can see all his books and read about him. And, again, go to Amazon, too. You'll find him there. So welcome back, Military Mike. How are you?
Hey, ladies. It's great to be back on your show.
Hey, it's great to have you back here. So did you know that M&Ms were that whole idea stemmed from troops going out there and having it in trail mix, and so that the M&Ms wouldn't melt?
Absolutely. It melts in your mouth, not in your hand.
See, he knows. He knows everything on this. Okay, can't stop Military Mike. Man, we just learned that from a National Geographic expert talking on her book as Food Fight, teaching kids the history of food, and we were learning about that. So it's really great. But now your book, this is really interesting. Mm-hmm. General Donn Starry, and he just is such an incredible person in regards to, I know before we went on the air, I was saying, like, he's just really observant, watches how things are done, yet it, to me, seems to get out there even with the troops. And he's quirky. He's got a good sense of humor about things, too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So
he sure is.
What led you to start writing about him? How did you find out about him?
Well, I first found out about Starry, I want to say it was around 2004, and young college man that I was at the time, I was reading up pretty much anything I could get my hands on tank warfare and anything having to do with the military. This was the start of my career as an ROTC cadet, and I knew pretty early on that I wanted to be a tank commander. And I was just fascinated by Starry's legacy, and I was fascinated by what his contributions to the armor and mechanized warfare community had been. And then when I actually became an officer, when I was going through the Armor Officer Basic course, I learned even more about him, dived a little bit more into the minutia of what his broader contributions were to the Army. That's when I found out about the doctrine of air-land battle, and how it morphed into the tactical doctrines that we use today. And went out looking for a biography on him, and just as I had done with Hal Moore, I was surprised that no one had ever written about him, despite a lot of the contributions that he had made to the Army as a whole. And when I really dove in deep and started studying the story arc of his life, I was surprised. I said to myself, there's probably no one in 20th century history who has had a bigger impact on maneuver warfare. And here you had a man who created all of the underpinnings for the AirLand Battle Doctrine, which was in so many ways responsible for the victory that we had in Desert Storm. And yet outside of the Army, practically nobody knows who this guy is.
And it's interesting, too, because when you think about his time frame, in Vietnam, and here we are with tank warfare, a lot of times people kind of, maybe on the general public side, could just kind of stop and not want to learn about things like this. But at the same time, we do need to understand defense, and we need to be prepared and trained. And yet at that time frame, how hard was it for him to come up with something new and be recognized?
Well, I think it was pretty hard, just given the function of where he was in the timeline, because he came of age as an officer, as a field commander, right at the tail end of Vietnam. And the war was very, very hard on the Army in more ways than one. not only because the public was against it and because we went in there hamstrung by rules of engagement that discouraged taking initiative rather than promoting it, but you also had a war where we were fighting an insurgency in the jungles, and it was eroding a lot of the core capabilities that we had as a fighting force. Throughout the entire decade plus that we were in Vietnam, you had a whole generation of soldiers coming out who didn't really know how to fight against another conventional force. So it was hard for him to shake off a lot of the atrophy that the Army had acquired, and say, okay, not only do we need to get back to basics, but because we were wasting so much time in Vietnam, the Soviets have jumped at least 2 generations ahead of us with their technology. So how do we bridge the gap? And more importantly, how do we compensate for their vast superiority in numbers? So when he sat down and he did the calculus, it was a big uphill struggle for him. But he also had something that was a stroke of luck. He had the opportunity to go over to Israel right at the end of the Yom Kippur War in 1973, and he said, "Okay, I've just seen the Israelis fight outnumbered against the Arabs for the 3rd time in 1 century, and they've won decisively, despite being outnumbered and despite having equipment that the Soviets are at least saying is better on paper. So let me take all of these lessons that the Israelis have learned, let me take all the lessons we've learned from Vietnam, let me combine it into one, and how can I make this into a doctrine that is sellable to the higher-ups and is sellable to the soldiers on the front lines of freedom?"
Wow. I think it's hard when things have been done a certain way for so long and have, up to a certain point, been successful, to get the higher-ups to take a look at something new. And I just remember when I was in high school and Vietnam was going on, that everybody was so upset about it. And part of the upset was they felt at home that our troops weren't given the right strategies for where they were expected to fight, and that they really weren't equipped with the right kind of equipment or thinking even of how they were supposed to be doing their job. I think we kind of felt at home that they were just tossed on in there, and do what you always do, win. It was kind of like that. And then the guys were coming home very demoralized in a lot of cases, and they really felt that they just weren't given what they needed for the kind of fight they were in.
Right.
Do you think that's part of what who he was recognizing those things too, and not only creating this whole new way of working, well, not brand new, but for us, our country, but also you have to sell it, and to the higher ups, and then also to your troops and those who you're working with. So he has to have those leadership.
Yeah, I think it's a very big part of who he was. Starry, he was never at a loss for words on anything having to do with leadership. He actually found himself in a pretty uncomfortable position where he had to learn how to be an effective leader on the fly, because he became an Army officer in 1948, and he had completely missed the boat on World War II. Yet when he enters the frontline ranks of the Army, here it is, 1948, the world is technically at peace, yet almost every single one of his soldiers had been combat veterans during World War II. And a lot of them had fought in some of the bloodiest battles of the European theater. And here they see the young Lieutenant Starry, who is fresh-faced and fresh out of West Point, and he has the arduous task of getting them to try to take him seriously, because here he is, this 20-something, and his average soldier is a 32 to 35-year-old man with multiple combat tours fighting the Nazis.
Wow.
I could just imagine every time he was like, "Okay, we need to do this," then they'd be like, "Okay, Sonny."
It's about dealing with change too,
yeah.
and war tactics always change, right? It's always a change of how you do things. When I was growing up in South Africa, we were studying the African Boer War, and there were so many lessons learned from Shaka, and how he created these strategies of circling the crawls, like the circling the, he would create like a, number one, all the warriors learned to run barefoot and would go, he trained them over hot coals and thorns, but these ways of how he ambushed the troops, they just circled around him and got him, and no one expected that. And then and once they learned that, then he'd have to change. And I think that's where General Starry really learned you cannot stay the same way, because then your enemy's going to know exactly what you're going to do.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Wow. And so he goes through, and this is a tank. This is the world of tanks. This is like kaboom. That's when you look at what a tank can do, for those of us who don't know, which would be me, because I've seen tanks. We have a tank museum just up the road.
Yes, we do.
Yes, in desert, it's up near Joshua Tree area. And there's all these tanks, and you stand next to them, and you feel really small. But how, like when that goes off? I mean, how far can the ammunition go out? Like the bullets or whatever comes out of there. I told you I don't know about things. I mean, how far does it go?
Funny.
Like, yeah.
Well, those main gun rounds can go up to and including 5 kilometers.
Wow.
That's freaky.
Wow.
So that's where he's like, okay, we're going to change this up. So when you look at this, isn't this kind of similar to what's going on in the world now in regards to AI and artificial intelligence, that it's about changing what we do as human beings and using technology, using robotics, and wouldn't you like to sit down with him right now today and see what he would think about what's going on now?
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
He never spoke. He never spoke very broadly about using robotics or using too much technology, but he was a very big fan of computer simulations. If we wind the clocks back to about 1978, this was right around the time that the Army was starting to jump on board, with using computer simulations. And computers, for the first time in history, were starting to downsize, from these big servers that would take up, an entire room to things that you could fit into smaller spaces and run all of these recyclable programs, in order to yield a result. And he was one of the he was one of the first people who really pushed for it. That says, hey, well, if we can get these teenagers who we want to be part of the all-volunteer force into the arcades to play things like Pac-Man and Asteroids, we can take that same concept and we can duplicate it for a soldier who's trying to improve his score on the tank gunnery range, or try and determine how he's going to square off against the Soviets if the Cold War ever becomes hot. Mm-hmm. And that was the birth of what we call SimNet, which was putting a bunch of soldiers into simulators and connecting them all into a single network, squaring off against each other in these realistic battle scenarios.
Wow.
And the cost saving measure to the Army was enormous, because they said, okay, well, instead of doing 3 or 4 maneuvers a year, costing us something to the tune of $10 million, we can do 2 field maneuvers and 3 computer simulations to keep people sharp, and we'll have much more money left over to improve the soldiers' quality of life, give them some pay raises, give them more benefits, because all that stuff got hurt pretty hard by Vietnam.
Yeah, when you think about it too, it's like what pilots do, is do flight simulations, and isn't that also a way to test, who's going through that, and just kind of like make sure your skills are there, and is that also why when you think about the land, when you look at places like 29 Palms, have you been up there to the base up in 29 Palms in Southern California?
I have not.
Okay, or Camp Pendleton. These I think they're some of the largest bases. I know the amphibious one is Camp Pendleton. I mean, they're massive, and when we lived out in those areas, they're like you hear kabooms and everything, and you're like, okay, war games are happening. Is this real or is it not? Do we duck or not? But I mean, it's really big. So when you go into those kind of those simulations, are you still going to have those kind of kabooms? Like when that happens, are there still? How real is it?
Not very realistic in that sense. I mean, you'll have the computer make a booming sound, and some of the more advanced simulators will actually vibrate the machine that you're using, to try and simulate what it would feel like if a vehicle were hit. But, you don't get that level of realism. Now, even though I haven't been to 29 Palms, if you go just a little bit south towards Barstow, I have been to Fort Irwin. And
you've been there.
The National Training Center, and that's probably the premier place in the Army for any force-on-force maneuvers, and any of the realistic war games that we want to validate our troops through before they deploy overseas. That is the primary place to go.
Also going to back to General Starry, when throughout his years, I know that he was at Fort Knox too. That's that's wild. I know. I always think of Fort Knox. I mean, that's historic. that's a legendary place. It seems that even from when he was a cadet at West Point, going all the way through his career, that he kept in contact with a lot of people. Like he was, became friends, and his circle, I was going to say, of connections, went up far in their lives too. I mean, even if you look at Alexander Haig becoming the Secretary of State under Reagan, so he seems to have like a good solid. He knew to connect with the right people and stay strong with them. Yeah, it's those lessons we learn from Mommy. Don't play with those kids. Play with these ones. To learn from them. How much do you think they influenced him? Did he really he was really learning from them too, studying them?
Well, I think for the most part, Starry took a lot of lessons from the people he served under directly. I think probably the biggest influence in his life was Creighton Abrams. Because here you had a man who, for all intents and purposes, was the most decorated tank commander of World War II, who just so happened to be Starry's 1st Battalion commander. And not only that, Starry would serve under him again at least 3 more times in 3 different capacities. And you really see Abrams' influence and his philosophies steering Starry onward to success. And it's kind of interesting because a lot of the long-lasting friendships that he had throughout his career in the military, I noticed that a lot of them were forged in units where he was serving under Abrams. So it's kind of like the friends that you have that are the closest friends, or the ones that you make in the organizations that are the best and most tightly led.
Exactly. And he also seemed very interested in the youth and community spirit. Like, both him and Letty, his wife, seemed to be very just
like community-minded.
Very community-minded, and not just, here, I'm going to give you, some money and then go do something. They seem to be, that's the thing with him. He seemed to be a very active individual.
Oh yeah, he most certainly was, and he was very blessed to have a wife who was as energetic as Letty was, because she if I can think of I can't think of very many people who were probably more destined and better suited to be a military spouse than Letty Starry.
Wow, and they knew each other from childhood. They were, they knew each other
They did.
I think you have to be as disciplined as the person that you're with that's in the military, if you're going to be a spouse of any kind to a military person, because it's so different than the average person's lifestyle.
And you have to be able to have adaptability. I know we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about the flexibility key of excellence with Bobby DePorter next on the show, but it's always interesting when we have these shows. They all start to connect with the different topics, but it does seem to be when you think of the role of being in the military, flexibility. Yet you still have to have that discipline, right? Of command and here's the plan, but there's always a change going on, and I think that's where he really. He's shown in that department of being able to handle change, expect change, and move forward with change. And is that part of with him, in West Point, he seemed to go up and down, like not necessarily be against it, but kind of be like critical of parts of it.
Yes. Yeah, he was not shy at all when it came to being critical of his alma mater. He was very critical of it, and I was surprised to learn from the family that he never went to any of the reunions. And one of the first times he returned to the academy was when he was accepting a distinguished alumni award. And even into the twilight of his life, he was never at a loss for words when it came to identifying things that really needed to be fixed there, according to him, because he said that it's not necessarily that we don't need it, but there's a lot of things that are fundamentally broken and fundamentally wrong that are counterproductive, and I really feel that it's losing its relevancy, and if you can't have a military academy that's relevant to the nation at large, and if you have too many policies and practices in place there that amount to difficulty for the sake of being difficult, then you're really doing a disservice to the cadets, you're doing a disservice to their longevity as officers, and you're also doing a disservice to the nation. And one of the things that he touched on, and I think one of the things that may have influenced some of his progeny to go the ROTC route instead, was that here you have these two officer-producing entities, yet the ROTC graduates, on average, stay in longer.
Wow. Well, that's a good indication.
That's interesting, yeah. That's interesting. That's interesting. So putting the book together was very well written, because my brain isn't 100% of understanding every military thing in the world, but I understand, and it's just you bring his character to life and also educate. And I really think that's a talent to have that, to be able to take anyone can read a book of something they may not know anything about. You know what I mean? This is something where sometimes when you look at just a military career of understanding how all of that works, I'm able to understand and read and enjoy and get to know how he thought. And I think that's something really important when it comes down to leadership. You may not understand the industry as it will, and I don't really want to call the military an industry, but even if you're reading, something about Steve Jobs and you don't know anything about technology, you should be able to understand it. And it's oftentimes that disconnect happens, but that's not what happens when you read Crusader. You get to understand a human being. You get to understand how things worked in our military. You understand history, and it's a very, very well-written book, Mike. When did you start writing it? Oh, you're welcome for sure. It just seems that there's attention to detail and still being able to make it flow. Did you work with the family to put this together? Because I can tell you've got a lot of care in it, because it's a project, it's somebody important, and you've got care for what you do and integrity for it.
Absolutely. Well, this one took me a bit longer than a lot of my normal texts do. I actually started writing the book in 2013 when I was still at Fort Bliss, and I didn't finish the first draft until the summer of 2016. So it was a little over 3 years, almost 3.5 years that it took me to complete, and that was really a function of me just wanting to make sure that I had all of the research materials together. I got to interview as many parts of the family as I could, and there was also There was also a little bit of a hiatus in the middle because I was transitioning from active duty back to civilian life. So had to take probably about a 6-month hiatus there just to transition the family from Fort Bliss and get us settled on the civilian side.
And that is a change, huh? Just to your life changes with that, right? And then, but you still have an active role with the military, right?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I'm still in the Army Reserve. I am currently in command of a support company. And, they are 121 of the best soldiers that I have ever met in my entire life.
Wow.
Cool.
Wow.
Nice.
Wow, that is awesome. That is awesome. Well, thank you for your service
Yes.
over the years and for
Thank
continuing
you.
with it and continuing to write and, tell these stories. I love it because I think so many of these stories of really good leaders and thoughtful people, just, his mind is amazing. And I think so many of these stories get lost,
For sure.
And I think sometimes a book is the only way to do it. You can go to a museum, which I always think is cool if you can see things and get that sense of feel, that sense of place. But a book really just allows you to sit and ponder and take your time. Do you want to see this as a movie?
Oh, I would love to see it as a movie.
I think it would be amazing. I think
Absolutely.
and you've got a really good photo collection in there. So that was from his family allowing you to use it in the book? Awesome.
It sure was. They were extremely helpful.
I think it's really valuable to connect the average person with the military. If you don't know somebody closely that's in the military or has been in the military and there's nobody in your family that has ever been in the military, then you really kind of it's there and you do appreciate it, but you don't really have any idea what it's like. Which is kind of, it's kind of strange when you think that these are people who put their life on the line, but you have no idea what it's like for them. So I think books like this are really valuable and they're needed. And there's so many parts to the military that are difficult to understand unless someone takes the time to explain it.
Exactly. And so it's good what you're doing here. And so I think a movie would be good. Is there anything that shocked you and made you sit up when you were writing this and getting all the information together? Was there a life lesson for you out of this?
Well, I think if there was any life lesson to be gleaned from Starry's own life was just, find something you love, and even if you love it when you love it, let that love be the motivation that carries you forward into making a career out of it. Because in any line of work that you do, there's going to be a lot of bureaucratic nuances. There are going to be things that really chap your hide. There are going to be things that there are going to be things that are frustrating. There are going to be naysayers. There are going to be people who are going to try to knock you down. There are going to be people who will tell you that you are doing everything wrong and that you're essentially going to be 3 sheets to the wind if you don't do it their way. All of those things are really just white noise. If you love what you do and you keep on doing it, that's 99% of what makes success. And that's 99% of what carried forward people like Donn Starry and Hal Moore. Everybody's good at different things and everyone has different strengths. Everyone has different talents. Find that strength, find that talent that you have, find that thing you really love, and just keep on going with it. You're going to have to deal with naysayers or, people who are going to, try and spit in your eye, so to speak. But, whatever it is that you have your passion for, just keep on gunning for it.
I agree.
And look, he says, keep on gunning for it.
Yes,
see, you got it in there. I'm going to keep tanking. But you see, I don't like the tanking now, because to me, tanking now, I'm going to go in kilometers now, and then my whole mind goes, okay, you can go far with that. Hal Moore, A Soldier Once and Always, I know you came on a show with that, and it's doing very well. And you've actually started a lecture series, Hal Moore, Lessons in Leadership, and tell us about that, because is that it? When you were writing Donn Starry's book, did you feel a connection to Hal more when you were writing it? Would you have liked to put them together and have a conversation?
I would. If I had the two of them in a room, I'm sure they could pass. I'm sure they could pass ideas back and forth for hours and even days. One of the underlying things that I noticed as a commonality between the two of them was that they were very quick to say that whenever you have a problem and you take it to your boss, don't just give the boss problems, give him a solution. And this also works the other way, that when you're a leader and there's a problem, when you announce the problem to your subordinates, have an idea for a solution, because there are few things that will kill respect for anyone than to be someone who is all problem and no solution. You just complain and you gripe and you say, well, this is life. At least have an idea, even if it's a vague idea or a broad concept. Just have some idea of how to fix it. Don't just be, don't just be sour grapes.
Don't be whiny.
No.
It doesn't work. No, it doesn't work. We're not allowed to do that around here. You have to have solutions. Otherwise, you come back the next day. You know what I mean? It's like even for a team of two here, it's that way. And I think it's interesting because they always say if it isn't broke, don't fix it. I'm always looking. It's like, to me, I think something's always going to get broke at some point, and always looking.
There's always a way to improve it.
Yeah, I always look at things. How can we improve it? How can we improve it? And I think that's what makes the world move forward is improvement and change. That's the energy. That's what the wheel is about, And one day we'll have triangular wheels. We just didn't know it. but look at how the tanks move. I mean, those are like totally, and I think about that. It's like they look like giant snails or giants, And it's interesting because it's like a tank, the way it moves across there, it's almost like an underwater, like you've got your submarines and how they move. It's like they're connected in a way, to me, the way the submarine moves. But I know, this is just me. I know that's not how it works, Mike, don't worry. But I'm just saying, it's just interesting, to be the person who goes, okay, we're going to build a tank and look at how the wheelie things, it's not like a normal wheel, and then, hey, we're going to put things underwater, we're going to build a submarine. Like, really? Then it happens, know? And, people must have thought that was crazy, the very first submarine. Like, really? But look what it's like now,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a long way from the diving belt.
When I think about the Cuban Missile Crisis and how that was going on with that guy coming through from Russia and that, like, hotboxed in there, in that submarine. Have you been on a submarine, or in a submarine, I should say, Mike?
I have.
Oh, my gosh, what's it like?
It's very cramped, and I am... I have the utmost admiration for anyone who could stay that cramped up for up to 6 months at a time.
Yeah.
Or even longer.
It really looks tiny, tiny, tiny.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's that, and then...
and then being under the water a lot of the time where you can't see out a window. Well, you can, but you're not.
What's it like being in a tank?
Well, I got to tell you, being inside a tank for me was a lot of fun. It is very cramped in there. Yeah, it's a tight squeeze even for the three people who are in the turret. The thing is that the thing for me is that it's a big rush when you have the main gun go off because it temporarily fills the turret with the smell of the cordite and the gunpowder. And if you're really into that stuff, like I was, then it makes it all the more enjoyable. The only downside that I would say there is to being inside a tank is that there's no air conditioning. But there is a little hack that you can do in order to make your stay inside the tank more bearable. The tank has what's called an NBC overpressurization system, and NBC stands for nuclear, biological, and chemical. So in case there's a chemical attack, you can hook up an air filter hose to your gas mask. Well, the air hose continuously blows air, and it's cold air, so if you just stick that down your jacket or your shirt while you're inside the tank, that'll keep you cool for hours on end.
Wow. Okay, so this is like,
alrighty.
when are you going to write the military dictionary? We need a glossary. This is exactly, we need a glossary.
Like a book of military hacks.
Yeah, I know. But this is when you talk about chemical warfare, that's a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that is, I think, one of the scariest things is chemical warfare.
Yeah,
That, to me,
sure.
that freaks me out, you know. I remember as a kid hearing about certain leaders that were going to put things in the water to poison people, and you know, and just that fear of that is just I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Now let's talk about the children's book that's coming out, World War II, Night Before Christmas, and so it's got the rhyme in there, and you've got Santa, but Santa is not wearing red. He's got his, you know, he's got his military clothing on, his uniform on, but he's got a beard. I like that part of it. Like, though belly and beard were beyond regulation. I like that part of it. So this is your second children's book, right?
Yes.
Okay. So
it sure is. It's another one that I'm going to say was inspired by my baby daughters.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
So the other one, you had snowmen in Hawaii?
Yes.
You were stationed in Hawaii for a while, weren't you?
I wish I had been, but no, I wasn't.
Okay. He's
I
like,
always wanted
want
to go to Hawaii, though.
Okay, that was his ploy. It's like, hello, look, everybody, I want to go to Hawaii. Send me there. So this one, it's really fun. I love it because it shows, it's a way of teaching kids the history of World War II in a really easy way of what the soldiers were going through against the Nazis out in the cold, and the sacrifices and commitment that were made from the armies, and you know what they were going through. And it's Christmas Eve, and no, you're not going to have what everybody else has, and there's those sacrifices, and I think that was well done in a way of it shows war is scary. It shows the sacrifice. It shows the uncomfort part of it, or discomfort is the word. But at the same time, it gives hope that things do get better in life. Just as you think, then it's like, okay, Santa comes with the reindeer, and I want the M&Ms in there. They didn't have a problem with the melting of M&Ms though at that point. It was a little cold, but I thought that was it's really, really a great tool, like an interesting lesson to teach kids, and at the same time fun. So what led you to write about this, the World War II part of it?
Well, as a kid, I remember that The Night Before Christmas was always one of my favorite stories. It really was one of my holiday favorites. And, being that I liked it so much as a kid, and I really liked the rhyming scheme, my love for the stanzas were already there. And over the years, there have been quite a few parodies and satires of The Night Before Christmas. And one of them that I recall from my childhood, well, actually two of them. Two of them were written by an author named James Rice. It was A Texas Night Before Christmas and A Cajun Night Before Christmas.
Oh, cool.
So in the Texas rendition of The Night Before Christmas, you had Santa who was, being pulled along. Instead of being pulled along by a sled and reindeer, he was being transported in a covered wagon pulled by longhorns. And in the Cajun version of A Night Before Christmas, it was alligators and a little skiff that you would see on the bayou. So growing up with those images, right as I started writing my first children's book, I was trying to generate some ideas for what would be my second one. And I said, well, is there a version of The Night Before Christmas that hasn't been done yet? So I went looking at all of the different satires that were out there. I was like, you know what? I think there really needs to be one on World War II, because it was such a pivotal moment in the history of our nation. Here you had what was pretty much a demonstrable, clear-cut case of good versus evil. We were trying to rid the world of tyranny, and it was one of the times in American history where everyone came together and they were putting the weight of our national might into the fight against the Nazis. And I said, would be something that would be great for a children's book, and if I could somehow tie the two together. So I sat down and took out this big legal pad and I started scribbling down notes. Okay, what would it look like if Santa paid a surprise visit to the troops, who were at Bastogne on Christmas Eve, 1944. We hear about the bravery and the sacrifice of the American soldiers who were on the front lines during the Battle of the Bulge. What would he do? What would he say to them? How could I set it up? And about 2 weeks later, that's when I had that's when I had the finished product.
Wow, right on.
World War II night before Christmas. And
the Battle of the Bulge is not Santa's tummy.
Well, it could be. What about the illustrations? Who did the illustrations? Because it's beautifully done.
Yeah, the illustrations are a credit of a wonderful lady named Melanie Stevens. She is a commercial artist and a children's book illustrator. She's in pretty high demand. She has illustrated a number of books in the past, and she was the illustrator for my first book. So so having had that professional relationship, I contacted her in the background and I said, Mel, I got another project in the queue. Would you be interested in illustrating this? And she said, okay, I'm listening.
Awesome.
That's cool, because it really is. It's beautifully done.
When do you expect this to be out on the shelves in time for Christmas?
This will be for sale, and it will be live on October 30th.
Okay.
That is
so
a Tuesday. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So when it's trick-or-treat time, give them a book. So everybody, again, the book we were talking about, the biography of General Donn Starry, is Crusader, General Donn Starry and the Army of His Times. You can get it, again, by Mike Guardia on Amazon, and also watch for the next children's book coming out. And this one, again, is World War II, Night Before Christmas. And, again, just keep up with Mike on his website, MikeGuardia.com. And also he's on Facebook, he's on Twitter. And we want to give a thank you to Family History Expos today for sponsoring his segment. They help people trace family roots, their family history. They have all kinds of online resources, educational resources and tools and programs and books, including they have all kinds of resources to help you trace your military history and ancestry, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And that can go global, especially if we're talking about World War II. And so there's a lot going on there. So everyone, that's FamilyHistoryExpos.com. Thank you so much for joining us, Mike. We have a special song for you and for General Donn Starry. This is called Captain America, because there we go. I thought it would be appropriate for him and for you. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, well, thank you. It was a pleasure to be back on the show, as always.
Thank you.
Take
Everybody,
care.
Here it is, Captain America by our friend Nikki Chris over in North Carolina, and you can go to her website, NikkiChris.com. Here it is.
Sleepy boy turned quickly into a man, wants to do what's right, the best that he can. His strength is something